Welcome to the Australian Weight Loss Surgery Podcast, where every 2 weeks we explore all the aspects of the weight loss surgery journey. You'll hear from a range of experts including bariatric surgeons, psychologists, patients and dietitians sharing up-to-date informative advice to help fast-track your long-term weight loss success.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Australian Weight Loss Surgery Podcast. Today I've got Merril Bohn from Melbourne. She's a dietitian from Melbourne, been working in bariatrics for 30 years and is part of Northeastern Weight Loss Surgery and also sees lots of patients from the Melbourne Centre of Bariatric Surgery. Welcome, Merril.
Thank you, Jacqui.
How are you?
Oh, well, I'm in Melbourne, so it's all a little bit grim down here at the moment.
I'm so sorry.
Cold and dark, and we're back in isolation. So if you can send some of your sunshine our way, I'd be very grateful.
I will definitely try my best to do that. I'm so sorry. And let's hope these next 6 weeks fly past real quick for you.
Yes, we hope so too.
So today I was just going to run some questions past you because I know that you're quite a voice as far as bariatric surgery goes. And also, you've seen a lot in your time around bariatric patients and the different types of surgeries that have eventuated. And I'm so interested in getting your knowledge on how patients can best support themselves from a dietetic perspective and things that you've seen that help patients to succeed over the longer term. And I guess that's what a lot of people are looking for is, what do I do after surgery? What am I focusing on? And also, how do I get this sort of long-term benefit and sustain my results? Would you agree that that's kind of a focus for some patients?
Oh, look, I think that's going to be the focus for every patient, Jacqui. As you've said, I've been in the game for 30 years now, so I've seen many different surgeries, and I would say the thing that clasps all of them together is that they all have the potential for weight regain. So I think the more we nail that and get that right initially, better the long-term outcome is going to be for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And so what do you feel would be the cornerstones of post-surgery, like long-term eating habits? What are the main key factors that a patient should be really focusing on learning about?
Look, I would say that getting onto good, solid, healthy food is vital. And it's quite difficult because initially most patients will find that the, more sloppier, easier to eat foods, and not necessarily unhealthy foods, things like soups and crackers and cheese and, really kind of mushy lasagnas and things like that go down more easily. So they kind of think to themselves, well, these must be the sort of foods that I'm supposed to eat because I can eat them a little bit easily and I can eat bigger volumes of them. But in actual fact, to be really successful in the long term, you want to gravitate to the foods that aren't so easy, and you want to find that those foods, you can only eat a small amount of them, that they really fill you up and they keep you full for a longer period of time. So getting onto those really solid foods is very important.
That's a great point. Looking at, choosing foods that aren't easy, which I think I see that in our group. There's so many people looking at having trouble with that. It's sitting, for too long, or it's hard to feel like I'm eating something that is that solid. But it's exactly, those kind of foods that would, keep you filled for a little bit longer.
That's exactly right. And I think it's a very human nature to sort of go, well, that's a bit heavy. That doesn't feel so comfortable. Or, when I eat that, I can only eat this much of it. Whereas if I choose that food, I can eat a lot more of it. So it seems like human nature to sort of gravitate to the thing that you can get more down and will sit more comfortably. But that invariably doesn't lead to as good a long-term success. And we need to be really careful that we're not really concerned about volume. It doesn't matter how much of that solid food you can eat. The important thing is you can eat a bit of it and it keep you full for a really long period of time. So not being sort of guided by your eyes, being guided by your stomach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also a key. This is great just to start with this first point. I really think we've opened up something here. Looking at foods that do keep you fuller for longer. What would you say are the three kind of things that they would need to master in that regard?
I think one of the things that we really need to be aware of, and one of the things that's changed so much since I first started in working with bariatric patients, is our focus on protein. And we now know a lot more about protein. We know that protein is really important for healing and repairing early on. We know that you need protein to protect your muscle mass, so you're losing your fat, not your muscle. And we know that protein is going to lead to more fullness later on and a better outcome with your weight. So one of the things I really focus on is not just making sure that my patients nail their protein intake initially, but they keep doing that throughout, particularly the first year and even beyond that. So whereas we used to focus on it sort of really in that initial post-op phase, we're now really looking at protein foods and protein supplements for a much longer period of time. So I think really addressing your protein intake is very, very important. My second point would be to look at eating regular meals and snacks and avoiding grazing, so that you're really having those structured small meals and then some structured snacks in between those small meals that are designed to get you through to the next meal. And I certainly find that people who do that better will have a better outcome, rather than those that just sort of, snack or graze all day long. That can be a real something that can upset people and really lead to weight gain if they get into those bad habits of never really filling their little pouches, but just kind of snacking and grazing all day long.
Yeah, not that substantial meal that actually gives I guess a lot of it is based on the blood sugars response to those meals as well. And that's where the protein comes in, is kind of keeping that level nice and even. I guess energy levels are even, and people feel more satisfied and less cravings and that sort of thing as a result of kind of keeping that regular, substantial protein meals going in.
And also too, I think if you leave eating, or you get distracted and you don't eat, and then suddenly you realise you're really, really hungry, you then tend to make a less desirable choice, or you eat too quickly and don't chew, and you can get into problems as well. So it really is good to schedule those regular meals and snacks as well.
And we talk about, a lot of people talk about hunger so after the 12-month mark, when things do start to change and hunger returns. Often I see that is the time where perhaps those protein levels have been dropped out and maybe more carbs are creeping in. So I don't know if I'm right, but is that a time where patients may be mistaking this hunger return for more a change in diet to a more carbohydrate-laden diet and less of that satisfying protein sensation after a meal? Would I be right saying that, or is there something else going on?
You certainly could be right about that, but I think there's some factors going on there. Firstly, we do know that the gut is a very adaptive organ, and that hormone that is responsible for hunger, the ghrelin, can have the ability to be produced in other areas of the body. So we might have taken out the major chunk of it, taking out the greater curvature of the stomach, but there's certainly the ability of the gut to say, well, I can produce that in a different area. So I think we do get people that will start producing more of that hormone, so they will get some hunger back. We also get some natural stretching up of the pouch by about that sort of 12-month period. So definitely needing a slightly bigger capacity. If we're talking about sleep and bypass, definitely would get that slightly bigger capacity around that time. So we have probably got a little bit of hunger hormone coming back. We have got probably a bigger capacity, but we certainly still should feel full on a smaller amount of food. So we just, and at that time, I think it's really important to address that protein content, and making sure that that would definitely be a factor. As far as carbohydrates go, I view them. I think carbohydrates can be really beneficial in the diet, because, and when I say carbohydrates, I'm talking low glycemic index, high fiber carbohydrates. So your, multigrain breads and cereals, your basmati rice, your quinoa and brown rice, your pastas, things like that, not cakes and biscuits and lollies.
Of course, And I think that's good to clarify. Is when we talk carbs, we don't demonise them, because they're such great low burn, slow burning carbohydrates that will give us, keep us satisfied. It just depends on what that's made out of, really.
That's right. And every bariatric patient will tell you when they first have their first bit of bread or rice how heavy and filling that is. And I say, yes, it's heavy and filling now, but imagine how fantastic that's going to be in 12 months' time when that's actually going to be getting in there and swelling and helping you feel fuller for longer.
Yeah.
So we certainly don't want the major component of the meal to be carbs. We certainly still want the major component of the meal to be protein and vitamin, and then high water content, veggies and salad and chocolates full of vitamins and minerals, but some carbohydrates in there, some of those low GI, high fibre carbohydrates can really help swell and fill and create that lovely feeling of fullness in conjunction with your protein and keep you feeling full for hours. So I agree with you. We don't want to demonise carbs, and I spend a lot of my time going, this is really, even, a bariatric diet including carbs with every meal is probably still a pretty low carb diet in a general Australian diet.
Yeah, very true. When you compare it to what you could be eating, without that knowledge of those healthy carbohydrates, I feel.
And also with the normal volumes that people can consume them in. So,
very true.
Yeah, so I really encourage low GI, high fibre carbohydrates in conjunction with the protein and the veggies and salad as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as far as establishing these new habits go, I think the mainstream before surgery, we're not really looking around for protein and, meeting this target each day. So a new patient or someone who's really looking at those long-term results, where can they find this support for really understanding food and, getting that rhythm going of establishing what a healthy meal plan might look like? What's the best kind of option for patients after surgery who are, really making a go of turning things upside down in effect?
Well, I would be hoping they'd be getting their education and from their point of contact, which is their surgical practice. So I would be hoping that they're seeing a dietitian at least once pre-surgery and then following up quite regularly post-surgery, and would be, as the weight loss journey continues, learning more and more about what are the right foods to put in this new little smaller stomach. So I would be hoping that they're getting their education from us in their surgical practice. There's some really great resources out there, some great bariatric surgery recipe books and resources out there. There's also things like the CSIRO diet, which sort of fits in really nicely with being a higher protein, lower but all the low GI, high fibre carbohydrate type diet. I think the important thing, Jacqui, is to really avoid fad dieting and sort of extreme dieting as well, and going, no carb or keto or, any of the very sort of quick fix diets that we all hear about every time we turn on the telly or the radio or open a magazine when we're in the doctor's surgery. They're full of them and they're all going to work for a small amount of time. But the question you need to ask yourself is, am I still going to be on this diet in 5 years' time? And if the answer is no, don't do it now.
And it's more about lifestyle. Can I sustain this methodology of eating for the rest of my life? Is it something that I can do when I'm on holidays, when I'm at work, when I'm at home? It's not going to turn my family's life upside down and, eliminate a range of different food groups for long periods, because I feel that there's a lot of that support in the mainstream of different diets that are very limiting and unsustainable in a lot of ways.
I couldn't agree more. And I think for your bariatric audience out there, they would all be nodding their heads, because every single one of them would have done those diets before. They would have lost weight, they would have regained the weight plus a little bit more. And, we're looking for a much more sustainable and maintainable practice after the surgery.
And that leads me to another question about, down the track, I see a lot of when weight is maybe starting to creep back up or hunger is coming back in and there's maybe a time for a bit of a readjustment. A lot of patients talk about going back onto shakes. Do you encourage that sort of thing?
Look, if if a patient comes to me and they're really determined that that's what they need to circuit break, I would be supportive of that. From a sort of a physiological point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense because shakes are liquid and they go through that small kind of funnel stomach quite easily. So that's, ideally they're not really the foods that you want your patient to be eating. You want them to be eating really solid foods. So from that perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if they're really thinking that that's all they can do and they really need that circuit breaker and they just want something to really focus on just for a couple of weeks, then I'm going to work with them on that as well. But my preference would be to say, well, let's have a look at what you're doing now and how can we fine-tune and make some changes within what you're doing now. That's probably going to be more maintainable and sustainable into the future.
I guess too, it's part of that learning about what the needs are and what a sustainable meal plan looks like, rather than always defaulting back to another kind of diet.
Correct.
And I think that's really where I try to steer people in the direction of food, because as you've said, we've all done 100 different diets in the past, and it's not necessarily establishing a new way for that person.
No, and it's once again going to be a little bit of a quick fix. It gives you a quick run on the board, but unless you then transition off that and start doing all the right maintainable and sustainable changes into the long term, you're just going to lose that benefit you got from 2 weeks on a shake diet.
Thank you for that. So getting on to nutritional issues after surgery, we know that the anatomy is changed forever by these gastric sleeve and bypass surgeries. Do you see much in the way of nutritional deficiencies in your practice?
Look, we do. I would say I spend quite a deal of my time chasing up bloods and ringing people and, correcting nutritional deficiencies. So it is very common, and there's a number of reasons why that occurs. Firstly, because of the reduction of acid in the stomach. There's a reduction of intrinsic factor, which helps to absorb vitamin B12. There's altered gastric emptying. There's a lowered intake of food. And if you've had something like a gastric bypass, there's also a decreased absorption of nutrients. So there's lots of reasons as to why people post-bariatric surgery can get nutritional deficiencies and do. That can all be corrected by being on lifelong multivitamins. And I think everybody has great intentions of doing that, but some people, it falls by the wayside. A lot of patients will tell me they feel so fantastic that they stop taking their multivitamins. And I say to them, so you didn't have a car accident last year? Did you stop paying your car insurance? And they'll look at me like I've got two heads, and I'll say, well, it's the same thing. You're taking your multivitamins in order to prevent those nutritional deficiencies happening. And Jacqui, nutritional deficiencies are not pleasant. They are hard to treat. They're horrible. You feel terrible. And I would prefer people don't get into that situation. So I guess I'm a little bit brutal about it because, as I've said, I've been in the game for a long time. So I've spent, quite a deal of time having to treat people's nutritional deficiencies. And my preference would be not to have to do that. So, we've got great supplements around now. So there's no excuses. They're, tailored, and they're much more pleasant and easier to take and all those sorts of things. So we don't really have any real excuses as to why people don't anymore. But I do recognise that some people can find that really difficult.
Yeah, there's different thoughts on it. I think some patients are under the impression that it's a 12-month commitment, and I don't know whether that's because they're under the care of their team in that kind of intensive period, whether that's the understanding. But I certainly speak to a lot of patients who thought it was just for the short term, and it's a great opportunity to have that conversation just to remind them that these anatomical changes never change. And there's a whole lot of permanent situation where, different absorption of different nutrients is heavily affected. So it is a commitment. And it's, I think, also bringing a new idea of prevention in, whereas a lot of the time in our kind of medical history, we've been shown to just deal with things when there's a problem rather than to prevent something happening that might cause you problems down the track. Would you agree with
that? Absolutely. Prevention's always going to be better than cure, always. So, yes, we'll keep flying the flag for that one, Jacqui, I think. But, I mean, we have in all our education material, in bold, this is for life. And but, people don't read their education material 2 years after they've had their surgery. So I guess it's just with time and
top of mind, getting that reminder on a regular basis, which again speaks to the importance of establishing this lifelong relationship with your practitioner and your dietitian, so that you continually tweaking and checking in just to make sure that you're not heading in the wrong direction and getting support before there are problems. And I see that that's the role, and it's an ongoing role and relationship with a dietitian many years after surgery.
Totally agree. And I think, because our operations have changed, because they are metabolic and malabsorptive and not just restriction operations anymore, there is the potential to have a lot more nutritional deficiencies. So iron, B12, vitamin D, vitamin A, even zinc deficiency we're seeing. So it is a big deal, and it is something that we really need to make sure that all our listeners know that they need to be on lifelong multivitamins, calcium, potentially vitamin D, and maybe whatever else pops up. But definitely.
And as a patient who's, cruising along there after surgery, what sort of things do they present to you with, and what are the symptoms you mainly see when there's deficiency?
Look, the biggest one would be iron, and that's when the patients are ringing and saying, I'm just feeling so fatigued. I wake up in the morning and don't even feel like I've been to bed. They just feel awful. They just feel like everything's an effort. And you can pretty much tell by talking to them that iron's going to be real culprit there. We also get people experiencing, not necessarily things that they would go to the dietitian for, but when I say to people, oh, look, your B12 is really low, are you waking up with tingling in your hands and feet? And they'll go, oh, yeah, every night my hands are asleep, or I'm finding my foot's falling asleep on the accelerator or whatever. So they're not necessarily linking that to a nutritional deficiency. And then we find, I'm getting a lot of vitamin A deficiencies at the moment, and they have to be pretty diabolically low before they're going to create any symptoms. But I certainly don't want it to get to that level where people are having eyesight difficulties because their vitamin A is so low. So we're wanting to catch that and treat it before it gets to
before there's change. And I think that's again, those changes that I actually was talking to someone on the phone last week, and we were discussing nutritional deficiencies and what you might see, and I mentioned the night blindness with vitamin A, and she said, I can't drive at night. I had no idea that's what it was. And that's we are seeing quite a lot of vitamin A, particularly in bypass. But it's those insipid kind of little changes that we just might not link to nutrients that are quite easily corrected. And if not corrected and taken care of, are any of the effects irreversible, Merril?
Look, certainly thiamine early on, but that's a whole different podcast in itself, really. And I guess just a note to anybody out there that if they are experiencing really extreme vomiting in the first couple of weeks post-bariatric surgery, that thiamine levels can be really at risk at that point in time. And if they do end up presenting to an ED department somewhere, that it's really important that they do say that they've had bariatric surgery, and could they please have some thiamine that goes, into the drip or into the muscles. And that's so important, because thiamine deficiency in those early I mean, it's very rare, but it has happened. It is quite documented, and that's awful. That can be irreversible. Generally, no. Most things that, in my experience, have been able to be reversed, which is very encouraging, but it's sometimes not easy. Sometimes it involves really big doses over quite a lengthy period of time and a lot of monitoring, a lot of blood tests to make sure we get that right, or it might be infusions or injections. So just best to avoid that if possible.
Yeah, and it is avoidable. So it's something that with good care and your own kind of responsibility, I suppose, it is something that's totally preventable. But yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about the mental health kind of feelings that come with low iron and low B group as well, like it's kind of a feeling of depressed mood and low energy and just kind of disinterest, which is quite easily turned around with those beautiful B group vitamins.
Absolutely.
So I guess looking from a dietary perspective, does your approach to each different surgery change? Like, is there a certain approach for a gastric sleeve patient as opposed to bypass, or do you find that your recommendations of kind of meal planning and that sort of thing are roughly the same? What are the differences there?
I wouldn't really differentiate them at all now. I think our approach is based on the ASMBS, the American Society for Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery, with their guidelines from, I think it was 2017. They really treat sleeve and bypass very similarly now. So I think most of us in the industry are really treating sleeve and bypass pretty much the same as far as nutritional content and multivitamin and mineral recommendations.
Absolutely. And there are recommended dietary phases. So the initial phase after surgery is the liquids phase, onto purees and then onto solid foods. Why do they exist? What are we trying to achieve by this period of kind of reintroducing food? What's important there?
Look, there's no sort of really worldwide best practice guidelines for that kind of texture modified period. So we all do it a little bit differently, and I think we all sort of do it the best, but it does vary between practices. And look, there are only minor variations. You might be on liquids for 1 week and pureed for 3, or you might be on liquid for 2 and pureed for 2. They're very minor differences, and my advice would be you just go with whatever your surgical practice advocates, because that's the way they perceive it needs to be done, and that's the way they want you to do it. Look, as I said, there's not a lot of evidence for it, but we would certainly see it as very important initially, just to make sure that after the operation, a lot of swelling around the operation site. So allowing the stomach that opportunity to heal and repair before sort of hammering it with all sorts of more difficult to digest foods. So having some liquid period, we do 2 weeks, and that's a pretty standard sort of time. It's also an easy way to get in nutrients and to get in your protein in that liquid time as well. So that's a little bit easier for the patient to sort of look at whatever they're having and see it very clearly marked on there. Gets a little bit more difficult when you're doing it with your food. And then progressing the stomach through onto sort of, once again, pureed or fairly soft foods, and just allowing that pretty new little just operated on stomach. You don't want to hammer it with anything that's abrasive or difficult to digest. There is always the chance of a leak, so we want to allow that staple line or that new opening that the bypass has got to heal and repair. So I really encourage everybody to really comply with that part of the process. Some people find that really drags and they are really ready to have something a little bit more solid, but my advice is always, well, we don't have a window into what's going on inside you, so let's just, you might feel great, but let's just allow that internal healing to occur and stick to the rules, and it won't be long before you can sort of start progressing your textures up and then getting new foods in there.
I think that's right. It just gives the body a chance to rest and heal. I see a lot of patients who are keen to get back to work and get back into life. And it is an exciting time where they really are starting this new journey. But yeah, I think it's good to remind that it is a marathon, not a race, and just letting the body have that kind of time to recuperate and reset and get ready for these new foods is a really important part of the process as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've got a huge bank of experience in dealing with patients. What do you see that sets some patients apart from others? What are the strengths that you see might, help one person progress along this path and stay that way? What are the differentiating factors you see?
I would say for me, the most defining factor is the most successful patient is going to be the one that doesn't rely on the tool. So those patients that see the tool exactly for what it is, that it's a great tool, but that's all it is. And it will help manage portion size. It will help manage hunger. It's not going to tell you this is a good food, this is not such a good food, or, how to put your meal together or what choices to make. And so I think the best patients for me are those that really change so much about their whole entire lifestyle with respect to what foods they choose, how frequently they eat, how much exercise they do, and really addressing any issues of non-hungry eating. So they're the people that see this operation as an adjunct to their success, not the whole basis of their success.
Tell me about non-hungry eating. What does that mean?
Well, I think most of us know that we don't just eat because we're hungry. That if we did, I don't think any of us would get into any weight issues. But so many other things cloud that. And if we look at the way people have been brought up, and I would put myself into this, whenever as a child anything went wrong, my mother would bake a cake or, open the packet of biscuits. And so we as children learnt that if anything went wrong, then food was a way of making us feel better. And look, it does initially, Jacqui, it does make you feel better for a short period of time.
There's no doubt about
but
that.
But it's very short lasting, and you're generally left with feelings of, oh, why did I do that? That hasn't helped at all, and now I'm going to gain weight, or it's going to prevent me losing weight, or whatever. So it sets up a whole heap of, other not very nice feelings and negative feelings. So, but, a lot of my patients will say, particularly after the surgery, they'll say, oh, I didn't realise, when you asked me if I was a person who, ate for emotional reasons, I would have said no, but now I realise I actually ate for all sorts of reasons, because I was happy, because I was sad, because I was lonely, because I was bored, just because it was, the evening and the kids were in bed and I turned on my favourite Netflix program. I suddenly find myself in the cupboard or the fridge. So people really learn a lot about their own strengths and weaknesses after they have this surgery. And I always really encourage them in that first year in particular, when you've got really good restriction, very little hunger, that's a really nice time to sort of go, look, possibly any habit eating or emotional eating or non-hungry eating is potentially going to come back into my life, and how am I going to deal with it? How am I going to recognise it, and how am I going to deal with it when it does reappear? So that's a really nice time to just be prepared for that. And I think that's another thing that our really successful patients will do. And they'll actually recognise that this is not gone forever. This is just, the beast is just dormant at the moment. But when I hit a road bump, and that might be, I have to put mum and dad in the nursing home, or my dog dies, or I've become redundant. We don't know what those roadblocks are going to be, but everybody will encounter a difficult time. And if in difficult times, if one of your strategies been to eat more, I mean, look at COVID, how many people are complaining that they're eating more during COVID, then being armed, knowing that, well, this is a difficult time, this potentially might be something I might start to do, and having some strategies to deal with that is very, very powerful.
I talk about that first year as the big, a real time of establishing things that will support you if things do get tricky or when hunger does return. And looking at that period as almost like the honeymoon of use this while everything's kind of quelled and really establish those new habits. Looking at that as well, looking at establishing new habits and the long-term I guess, again, looking at the lifestyle changes, what are the things that you see really don't help a patient when, what kind of things get in the way, and what kind of problems do you see arise that are kind of almost a sabotaging effect, or
Look,
limiting their
I think on the flip side
progress
of success, Jacqui, is those patients that just want the tool to do it all for them. They don't actually want to put much input towards this at all. And as you so rightly said, that honeymoon period, that first 6 to 12 months, it seemingly looks like the tool is going to do it all for you. And then, of course, as most honeymoons do, they have to end. And that's when that patient will find that they actually need to put some input towards this. They need to actually make a concerted effort about the food choices that they're making. They need to really look at the time frame that they're eating. They can't just, they need to look at, are they doing any exercise or activity, because it's not just going to keep going on its own. And look, every now and again you do find, and I have some of these, and I'm sure anybody in the profession would be aware of it, you do occasionally get a patient who just looks at you with complete disbelief and says, but I can't go out and eat a normal pub meal anymore. And I go, well, you've had 80% of your stomach removed. That was never going to be on the card. And it's like, but I thought I'd be able to just eat normally.
Just the same, but less, and it's not the key, really, is it?
No. I mean, that's rare, but it does happen, and I feel terribly sorry for those patients, because
it's a big adjustment.
They just haven't really got it in their head, really, that this is, there's no such thing as having bariatric surgery and not having to make. It's not going to, that it's not going to change your life, and you're not going to have to make really good changes as well. So
very true.
Yeah.
When you say it's getting it into their head, how much do you think psychology comes into the way a person eats, and what do you see the best way to master this area would be?
Oh, I think that's a massive part. If your head's not in the game, you're not in the game. So I think that's a really fantastic, really looking at those two connections, and they really can't work independently. And we're finding with so much information out these days that patients are coming along really quite educated. And, I think I had 2 or 3 last week out of my 8 to 10 new patients that already said to me, oh, I'm already doing this and I've lost some weight. And, they were already making these amazing sustainable changes before they'd even walked into our practice. And I immediately think you're going to do really well, because you're not having a food funeral, as some patients will call it, and
I was just about to say
going out to all your favourite restaurants and having as much smorgasbord, all you can eat before you come into this surgery, because it's not like you're never going to be able to eat those foods again. With the newer operations, the sleeve and bypass, you are going to be able to eat. Our aim is for you to be able to eat a small amount of everything. So it's not deprivation, it's discerning. So,
good point.
As one of my patients said to me, I now have precious real estate, and I love that. Yeah. I love that. So
I love that.
Yeah, I love it too. And I said, can I steal that from you? Because I love that.
What a great attitude. And I think that's the key, and I've talked about this in my group, is if you're going to do it, have your personal rules. So I have a personal rule that, say, if someone offers me a Portuguese tart, that's prime real estate, whereas if they're offering me chips and they're not my thing, that's my personal rule is, well, I don't do that. So it's having these things that you do and you don't do, so that it kind of it makes you more discerning, and it really helps you to stop and think about, well, do I do that? Is that the thing I do now? Or is my special thing, if I'm really going to do this, is it, a Portuguese tart or a piece of chocolate or whatever it is that really must float your boat before you're going to engage in it? I think it just kind of keeps that front of mind understanding of not, it's not everything's not on offer, but if it is on offer, it's got to be really special.
It sounds like a really nice way of putting mindful eating. So, just sort of, okay, like you said, is this going to float my boat? Is this what I really feel like? Is this, I mean, I think initially you've got to think more nutritionally than that. You've got a very limited opportunity to nourish yourself, and you need to think protein and, vitamins and minerals.
Bang for your buck,
But later on, and I think what we're more invested in and what you're talking about is sort of, maintaining over that long period of time. And I think that's a lovely way of looking at it, Jacqui, that, does this float my boat? Is this something I really fancy at the moment? Is it my Portuguese tart? Am I going to be able to sit and really savour this? And, I think they're great questions to ask yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that it is being mindful. It's looking at something and thinking before doing. And I think we're not really taught how to do that. I think we're, like you were saying, our understanding of food and the culture and socialization around food is framed really early on in life, that it either placates you or makes you happy, or, is used as reward or is used as punishment. And, don't leave the table until everything on your plate is eaten. That was how I grew up too.
Yes, me too.
If you want it or you don't want it, you're not going until that food has been consumed. So I had the same thing, walking away from the dinner table, feeling like I was going to burst. And that became the normal way of my understanding of how a meal finishes, is that you must be splitting at the seams, because that's the end of the meal. So to train yourself back to that kind of 60 to 70% full, and to be hungry is a really foreign feeling. And I do talk about that with patients who are complaining about hunger. It's quite normal to feel hunger, but I don't think we let ourselves do that often enough. And it kind of instills this feeling of panic of, oh my God, I'm hungry. And it's not a bad thing. It's actually a message of, it's time to eat. And I don't know if we let ourselves get to that feeling, not for, you wouldn't go hungry for 5 or 6 hours, but it's actually a cue to have another meal. And yes, we would be hungry every couple of hours if we've only got a tiny little tummy.
Yeah.
So I think it's getting a better understanding of hungry is not dying.
Yeah. Certainly not in Australia.
It's actually something to listen to. No, there's not many of us that are going hungry. So I think it is like, it's a lot of these sensations are foreign.
Oh, look, I agree. And, having to talking to patients who are, a bit further down the track in those subsequent years, and, some of them will say, I get hungry again 3 or 4 hours later. And I just say that's completely normal. That is your body telling you that you need to physiologically have some food. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the choice you then make that is
correct,
that dictates success or failure. So if you get hungry around that 3 or 4 o'clock period where your blood sugar level drops at work and you've still got a few hours of work left, that's completely physiologically normal. But if you then reach for a chocolate bar every day, that then becomes an issue. Whereas if you pull out your piece of fruit or your nuts or, whatever other good, solid, healthy snack, your high-protein yogurt or whatever, then that's a good thing to be doing to your body and will pep you up and get you through till you get home and get your dinner. So I think we need to really concentrate on what is normal.
Correct. And, what we can expect and what we do with that. It's a great point, I think, particularly because we do talk about hunger as a negative.
Yes.
And there's this expectation that you'll never be hungry. But it's completely normal if you've sort of increased your muscle levels, increased your activity and lost a lot of body fat, you might find you are hungry more often. So it's actually a good sign.
I don't tend to worry about return of hunger, so long as the hunger is fixed on a small amount of food.
People talk about this early hunger, and wonder about silent reflux. Do you see a link between that kind of constant feeling of hunger and a reflux situation, or is that a fallacy?
Look, I think you've always got to be a little bit careful of whether someone is experiencing reflux, because if they are, they might be only having a really small amount of food and that's causing reflux and therefore they're having to stop eating. So, I think it's worth ruling out, definitely.
Yeah.
But I also think too, we do give people unrealistic expectations, and people's hunger responses will be very different. And someone who gets a very good hormonal response after a cerebral bypass may not get any hunger back for 2 years. Someone who doesn't get such a good hormonal response may get hunger back after 3 months. So I think we don't know when we operate on someone what their hormonal response is going to be. And that's why I've stopped sort of, really saying, oh, you won't get hungry for 12 months, because you may. That's why I tend to say, look, I'm not really all that concerned about you getting a little bit of hunger back, so long as you are able to cure that hunger on a relatively small amount of solid, healthy food. So I hope that
making good choices.
Yeah, and I hope that kind of reassures people a little bit that hunger isn't necessarily something they need to be really afraid of or feel that they've failed if they're getting a bit of hunger. We cannot dictate your hormonal response to these operations. That is something genetically determined. So we can only work within the framework of what you get.
And looking at the person in front of you. And that's where I, again, think checking in on a regular basis with your professionals is huge, because these, fallacies or information that we pull from the internet of you'll never be hungry again. It's a good opportunity to have those conversations. And I think you walk away with a better feeling of success when it's put to you in a way that makes sense to you and is pertinent to you, rather than a blanket statement you see online somewhere. So I think there's huge relevance in keeping in contact with professionals who've seen it all before and can give you a really quite frank and succinct answer around it.
Totally agree. We really want to keep our patients for life. That is our aim.
Yeah, I don't know. I always give the analogy of, would you go out and play soccer without having a coach? And I think that's just a game of soccer. And here we are trying to live our lives with no coach. And if it's something that we haven't got experience in and we're turning upside down, would you not look for coaching and support and education and, someone to hold your hand a little bit along the way? It's I think it's a huge undertaking, this expectation of really instilling these huge changes in our lifestyle and eating habits that obviously have had less success in the past. It's a lot to ask of someone to do it on their own. I just can't see it going well.
Oh, and we've got history to tell us it doesn't go well, Jacqui. I mean, once again, drawing on 30 years of experience, that was how we used to do it back in the old stapling and the non-adjustable gastric band days. You put in your operation and go, well, see you later. And I still see some of those people today that have just struggled from day dot, really, and have regained all their weight and are very unhappy with it all and feel it's all their fault, but they were never followed up by their professionals, because that's not what you did 25 years ago.
Not education.
No.
Yeah, amazing. We've come so far.
So now my preference is to use a chronic disease management model, because obesity is the most chronic disease that we have in our society today. And like your example of the coach, someone doesn't come in and get diagnosed with diabetes and get put on insulin and get told to go away and never come back. There's different insulin regimens, there's different medications, there's all sorts of different things that come up all the time. You go back a couple of times a year and check in with your endocrinologist and get all your bloods done. And people do that, and yet they feel they can have bariatric surgery and disappear.
Yeah, that's a great analogy too, isn't it?
I just say to them these days that it is a chronic disease management model. We can help you. This tool can help put you in remission from your obesity, but in order to stay in remission, you've got to keep doing all the things that put you in remission, and part of that is to keep coming back and engaging with your team.
And again, it's a preventive approach, and I don't think we're sold that, when it's a very reactive society as far as medical sometimes that we live in, and we tend to get things fixed when they're really broken. But looking at what you're saying about the chronic illness kind of chronic disease protocols, I think when you really scratch the surface of gastric cerebral bypass patient's health history, it's a complex and multi-system impact that, this one tool, like you say, is not the fix for it. And those systems that have been affected by obesity really need to be monitored and cared for.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, what a great session. Thanks so much for your time. I've got one last question and parting question. What's the most, I guess, important piece of advice you would give to someone who's either undergone or looking at having bariatric surgery?
I think planning and prepping is really important. If you're, say, that example that we used before, and it gets to 3 or 4 in the afternoon, you've had a really busy day at work and you need a snack and you haven't planned and prepped and got one with you, and there's a vending machine in the next room, then you're setting yourself up to make a less desirable choice. Whereas if you've got your snack with you, your little packet of nuts or your high protein yogurt or whatever it happens to be, you are more likely to make that good choice. And the same goes for meals. To make sure you've had breakfast before you leave the house, you've got lunch with you, which could be last night's leftovers or a little tin of tuna and some salad, and you know that you've got the chicken out of the freezer ready to be cooked up that night. So once again, as an adjunct to success, those patients who prep and plan, I think, do really so much better. And I guess if I had to sum up, the one thing I don't want people to do over the 30 years of history is...
I'd love to hear this.
It's very simple. Do not eat crackers and cheese as a meal. That is my absolute number one. And as I say to my patients, you're having me over for lunch. Are you going to give me crackers and cheese? They go, oh, no. And I go, well, don't give it to yourself. It's not a meal. Yeah. It's not filling. You will end up eating half a box of crackers and, 10 slices of cheese.
Too much cheese.
So, that would be my parting gift to everybody.
Strike the cheese and crackers off the list.
And if you've got any of my patients out there, they'll be laughing and saying, I've heard that before.
I do hear a lot of cheese and crackers in the site too. So that's great advice. I'm so pleased you could avail yourself on this cold and wintry Sunday afternoon in lockdown.
Gives me something to do.
Absolutely. Outside of planning next week's dinners, I bet.
I'll be here, so it won't matter. I don't have to do much planning now. I'm going to be here. So won't be straying too far from the family home, unfortunately.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, thank you. I can't believe what we've gotten out of this session. It's just been so revealing and really supportive, I think, which is, obviously what our intentions are. I'd love to talk to you again and maybe take a different angle. So if you've got time for that, we can discuss. But Merril, Bohn, thank you so much for your time. And thanks again.
Thanks, Jacqui. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, and just before you go, we would love to hear your feedback, so please give us a rating and review. For other interesting topics of conversation and inspiration, come and drop into our Facebook community at BN Bariatric. If you've enjoyed our podcast, we hope you will share on your Facebook or Instagram and hit subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.